Good morning to you, my friend, and welcome back to the Higher Grounds podcast. Thank you for joining me on this fine morning. Today, we're going to pick up where we left off on last week. Last week, I did the first in a series on why I left politics. Back in 2015, I got involved in politics. Never thought that that would be something that I would do, but through a multiple of circumstances, the Lord thrust us in that direction, and we became involved. There was a handful of us that did. Brother Chad Watson, Brother Stephen Williamson, and myself became involved in politics. And the Lord allowed us the privilege of traveling and seeing a lot of things and meeting a lot of people, and just enjoying the journey for a while. But there were some things that we began to see early on. Now, last week, if you remember, as we were ending the podcast, we had walked our way through the We Stand With God rallies and what came out of all of that. And then we went and began to deal with some of the things that we began to see. And I made mention last week about my eyes starting to crack open a bit with the Ted Cruz campaign. And then I had given you a spoiler alert for today as we began to talk about how that I was threatening to throw the entire Cruz campaign under the bus in the state of South Carolina just days before the South Carolina primary. And so we want to talk about that again. Now, as you know, that in the election where Donald Trump became our president for the first time and only time, when he became president, it was quite a unique run. Now, in the state of South Carolina, we're one of the first states in regard to primaries, and we set the tone for a lot of the primary elections going forward. And at that time, you had Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and Dr. Ben Carson and Donald Trump running in the Republican primary. And Rick Perry, the former governor of Texas, had been in the primary early and had dropped out. We had the opportunity of meeting Rick Perry and spending some time with him, and we enjoyed actually being around him, a very down-to-earth individual. Had the privilege of speaking with him on different occasions in different places in the state of South Carolina. He spoke for us in the We Stand With God rally, the very first one that we had in Columbia, and he did an outstanding job and was always very receptive and wanted us to pray with him and ask God to lead him and to give him direction. He was quite a joy to get to know. Now, when it came to Mr. Cruz, I noticed some things were a little bit different. He was running on a platform where he fancied himself a Christian. I'm not saying he wasn't, but he was presenting himself as this very conservative, very devout Christian. And it was in the state of South Carolina where some things came out in regard to some details that were uncovered that led a lot of Christians in the state of South Carolina to question whether or not he was as devout as what he claimed to be. And here's what happened. Mike Huckabee had uncovered some things, and I was not real fond of this being uncovered in the way that it was, but Huckabee's campaign had uncovered the fact that he had stated he was a member of the First Baptist Church in his particular town in Texas, but yet he was not giving. He and his wife were not giving and tithing to the work of the Lord there in his home church. And when that record of his tithing record came out, somehow Marco Rubio got a hold of that information, and I happened to be at National Review in Greenville, South Carolina, and Mark Levin and many other political pundits were there, and most all of the individuals who were running in the South Carolina primary, with the exception of Donald Trump and Marco Rubio happened to be there at National Review. Dr. Carson was there, did a great job. Ted Cruz was there, as far as his speech was concerned, did a great job. But during the National Review, the Rubio campaign was blanketing the upstate with this information that Cruz was not a tithing, giving member of his local church, which hurt him in the state of South Carolina and primarily in the upstate, which is a very religious community. And so that was a real mark to his character and a black eye to his campaign. All of that being said, it lets you know the very disgusting depths that politics will seek to steep to in order to win or to undercut the individuals that they're running against. Also, during this period of time at National Review, while I was there, Brother Chad Watson was there with me. If I remember right, our spouses were with us. The political pundits that were conservative political pundits were quick to curse and to say things that were off-colored, even in the presence of children, which I had a great distaste for. Even since that point in time, I have known of political people in the Christian realm who try to seek to engage the church and pastors in the political process who have used some of the major names on Fox News and political conservatives in their platforms, and literally some of these people have cursed even in churches. This again brings great distaste to my mouth and lets me in on the fact that they really do not care about our core values as Christians in the political world. They simply don't care. So that brings me to the week right prior to right prior to the primary in South Carolina. I was contacted by, this would have been February, if my memory serves me correctly. I was contacted by a pastor who was having us in for a political day. It was a big deal. The pastor was having us in, and Chad Conley, a dear man of God, a friend, Brother Chad was there to speak that night. Raphael Cruz, the dad of Ted Cruz, was there to speak that evening. And he's a former Southern Baptist pastor, if my memory serves me correct. He's Cuban in descent. Then Ted Cruz was on the docket, and I was on the docket to give a keynote speech that night at the end of the meeting. Many people were coming in. It had been advertised, and a lot of people were anticipating being there. Churches were bringing busloads of folks there. It was going to be a big deal. Well, on Thursday, the pastor of the church called me, and he said, "I've got a real problem." And I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "Well, I just got word from the Cruz campaign that Ted Cruz is not going to make it. He is going to cancel coming." And I said, "Well, what is the reason for canceling?" He said, "Well, we have been informed that he's been in Washington signing legislation. He's been busy all week, and then he's overbooked where he is supposed to be on this week." And I said to the pastor, I said, "He's not overbooked. When you are this big a deal in politics, you don't overbook. It doesn't look right." And I said, "What do you want me to do?" He said, "Would you call Raphael Cruz, Ted Cruz's dad, and would you find out what's going on?" I said, "Yeah, sure." So I picked up the phone, called Raphael Cruz, and I said, "Raphael," I said, "why is your son canceling and backing out on coming to be at this event?" He said, "Well," he said, "he's been in Washington signing legislation, and he's overbooked for that date." I said, "Sir, when you're as high in politics as you guys are, you don't overbook. I said, it sounds to me like you're no different than all the other politicians in Washington and that you have integrity and character problems. At which Mr. Cruz went off on me. I mean, he really let me have it. And I sat there and listened to him. And when he finally ended his tirade against my comments against the character of his son, I said to him, you called me and asked me for my endorsement for your son, and I gave it to you. I said, now, I want you to hear me. You better never use my name as having endorsed your son if your son does not show up at this event. I said, now, here's what's going to happen. I said, I'm coming to this event whether your son cancels or not. And when my time comes to speak, I'm going to stand behind the lectern, and I am going to tell everyone that attends that meeting who live in the state of South Carolina that your son is no different than all the other politicians in Washington, and he can't be trusted, and he lied to this whole crowd about being here, and I am going to throw you under the bus. To which he said, you would not do that. I said, you don't know me very well, do you? He said, well, what do I do? I said, I suggest you get off of the phone yesterday and call your son and his handlers and get him to honor his commitment. It wasn't long before I heard from different Cruz people who I forget whether I called or they called or whether they text me to call. I forget the details there. But we were talking to campaign managers and handlers in the state of South Carolina. And one of the young men, when I spoke to him, he gave me the same spiel that the rest of them had given me. And I said, well, here's what's going to happen. I said, I'm going to throw you all under the bus because you've lied to the people. He said, you wouldn't do that. This is too important an election. I said, well, you've not known me long and you don't know me well. I said, I will throw everybody under the bus. I don't care what it costs. He said, well, what should I do? I said, I suggest you get your candidate to this event. Well, long story short, they did get their candidate to the event. And when they got their candidate to the event, they had to charter a plane to get him there. And then I found out later why they had declined to come. It had nothing to do with being overbooked, and it had nothing to do with signing legislation in Washington. What it had to do with was the fact that he, Ted Cruz, had not seen his wife and his children in the last couple of weeks, and this was going to be an opportunity for him to take a day and spend the entire day with his wife and I believe it was 2 daughters, young ones, at that time. Now, that makes no sense to me. You're dealing with Christian conservatives, and you're going to put your family above your politics. That is going to be something that endears you to the Christian community, the fact that you believe family is extremely important. But he's a politician, and politicians don't understand that truth is the best policy. So that was another incident that occurred for me that really gave me difficulty. Well, on about that same time, Donald Trump, of course, won the primary in the state of South Carolina, and Donald Trump was continuing his tirade against his main opponent, which was Ted Cruz at the time. And even after our Ted Cruz event, I still supported the man, and I felt he was the best choice at the time for those that were continuing to run in the primary. And so all of that being said, down toward the end of the primaries across the states, when it would be determined that Donald Trump would be the nominee of the Republican Party, it was quite interesting to note that Trump came on the news media and literally was disparaging toward Trump or toward Cruz and his father, and even outright downright lied about Cruz and about his father, and turnabout being fair play, I guess. But I don't appreciate that even out of Mr. Trump. So after that, once all of that was said and done, this thing began to, of course, really go downhill fast as far as the culture in America was concerned. And I was contacted by the pastor of the First Baptist Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, who at that time was a man by the name of Mark Harris. Mark Harris is still involved in politics, running for public office in the state of South Carolina right now. And Mark asked me if I would help him or to help to support with what was called the HB2 bill. In Charlotte, North Carolina, the mayor, who was a leftist, bleeding heart liberal, had a city ordinance set in place that allowed men to use women's bathrooms in this transgender movement mess. Well, this was an uproar at that time, and Brother Mark Harris led a great rally. We came to the rally. We're a part of the rally. And this led to the politicians in the state of North Carolina writing a bill in the House called the HB2 bill, or the House Bill 2. And when the HB2 bill came out, it rescinded the ordinance, or overrode the ordinance of the state of the city of Charlotte. The city of Charlotte did not have the right to make such an ordinance politically. And the HB2 bill would protect our young ladies in bathrooms. It would protect our young men in bathrooms, and it was a gender distinctive bill. Now, as soon as that took place, there was an onslaught by the LGBTQ community against Raleigh, North Carolina, and against the Capitol for what took place. I didn't witness it, but I was told by people that worked there that there were unmentionable things that was done to the building that housed the representatives and the senators by the LGBTQ community, and I didn't witness it. I'm just stating what was said to me. Now, I began to lobby in regard to the HB2 bill, because there was great pressure to rescind the bill and to do away with it. And I remember going to the Capitol and interacting with senators and interacting with representatives from the state of South Carolina or North Carolina in regard to all of this. And as I did, of course, we would every time we were there, we would see transgendered folk that would be there lobbying for the same cause. I got to know several of the folks there, and one of our local representatives was a man by the name of Tommy Tucker. At that time, Tommy Tucker, and he still lives in our community, our county, to the best of my knowledge. He was our representative from our county, Union County, North Carolina, and I began to interact with him on a regular basis, going into his office and speaking to him in a lobbying fashion about keeping this bill in place, because there was really great pressure. And the pressure was coming from the NFL, from the NBA, and from the NCAA. These three sports organizations was pressuring the politicians in North Carolina by threatening them with about withholding championship games and tournaments that would be held in the NCAA, and withholding that from the state of North Carolina, and affecting the tourism dollars in the state of North Carolina to the tune of billions of dollars. Now, when I began to lobby and found out what was going on, I would go and speak to these representatives and these senators about this, not just myself, but others would as well. And one of the things that we picked up on was there was great pressure that they were going through, but they were resilient. These conservatives, of which Mr. Tucker was one, these conservatives were going to make sure that this didn't happen. Well, needless to say, it was rescinded, and secondarily, I went in a day before the vote would take place in regard to this bill and its recension. I went into Mr. Tucker's office, sat down with him in his office, and he said, "Don't worry about it. There is absolutely no worries whatsoever. This bill is going nowhere. You don't have to worry about this bill going anywhere. This bill is going to be perfectly fine. And I want you to know, preacher, everything's great, and we're going to hold the line." Well, within less than 24 hours, the vote was taken, the bill was rescinded, and Mr. Tucker was a part of the rescission of the bill. So this began to allow me to see that this politics thing is full of a bunch of lying people and full of people who have no concern for Christian values nor what we would consider to be fiscal or social conservatism. It all has to do with what everything has to do with, which is the bottom dollar. It has to do with the almighty dollar, even among those who are quote unquote staunch conservative. And so I continued to get this bad taste in my mouth. Brother Mark Harris, that we spoke to, he had a run at the Senate or at the House to be a House member in the state of North Carolina in Washington, and a friend of mine was his campaign manager, and they legally did some things in regard to the collection of ballots, which was legal and had been done by this same individual for the Democratic Party prior to him switching parties. And then Brother Harris won the election, and then the election was declared void, and they called for a special election. The election commission did. They had never done that before with the same individual who was collecting absentee ballots. And so again, I am seeing and then learned more that I will not speak about here on the air about the reason why that the election commission would not certify the election. And once again, an even more sour taste is coming into my mouth about the subject of this business of politics. Well, we travel on down the road, and once Donald Trump has won the primary, and he is going to be the Republican nominee. And once again, remember from last week, I did not vote for Donald Trump in the first election. I did not trust him, and I personally felt that he was a plant, and that's how I personally felt about it. And I did not want that man as my president. I also stated on last week that I did vote for him in the second election. I will also state on this program that I will not vote for him again. He doesn't represent in any way who and what that I am. What I feel politically, or what I feel in regard to my conservatism in my political views. He doesn't represent who I am, and I'm not going to vote for him. Now, all of that being said, one of the things that really when he won, I went to Brother Chad Conley, and I called him and I said, "Listen, I'm out. I'm done. I don't want anything else to do with this." And Chad said to me, he said, "Brother Andy," he said, you need to reconsider all of that. He said, I want you to reconsider this, and I don't want you to quit." And he gave me a good pitch about staying with it. And I decided to get involved in our local Republican Party, our local GOP party in our county. And in so doing, in getting involved with it, I eventually became the chairman of our party in our community. And with that opened up some meetings with different men and different places. And I got to see even more things from the inside that were surprising to me. Stories that we will bring up probably in next week's episode. But one of the things that really began to work in my mind about all of this was when Donald Trump hired on his staff a man by the name of Anthony Scaramucci. Now, Anthony Scaramucci was one of the top, if not the number one fundraiser for Obama in 2012, and he was also a staunch supporter of Hillary Clinton. He is a far left-leaning investment banker from New York. Scaramucci was hired by Donald Trump on his cabinet and given a seat on his cabinet. There was, when this took place, I was in a meeting with the Representative Ralph Norman from the state of South Carolina. Several of us were, 8 or 10 of us were in a meeting with him. And we were each talking about these kinds of things that were going on. And no one even knew about this, and I brought it up in our meeting, and I said, I don't understand our president. How do you take a man that opposed you, stood against you, and stands against everything you say you are for, and is as left-leaning Democrat as there possibly could be, and hire him to be a part of your staff? I don't understand that. I don't get that. To which Representative Norman said, well, I don't know the answer to that, but you can bank on it that the president has the best in mind for the country and he's got something going on. Well, he did have something going on. There was not a meeting of the minds between Wrights Priebus, who was the chief of staff for Donald Trump, and this Scaramucci character had some issues between them, and because of the issues, and Scaramucci said some things off-colored on newscasts, and he was just like a bull in a china shop while he was there, and it led to there being a confrontation between Priebus and between Scaramucci, and it led to the dismissal of Priebus from his chief of staff seat. Now, General Kelly was put in his position, and within 2 weeks, Scaramucci was fired. I was told later by a source who was connected to the White House that the reason that Scaramucci was brought on was for a confrontation with Priebus, and that he knew when he was hired that he would be fired within a couple of weeks. Now, whether or not that source was accurate or not, I have no proof that it was, but it does stand to reason, and the way it bore out looks as if that was the case. Now, this was, again, and we're talking about why I left politics. Now, that was a really bitter pill for me to swallow when it came to how these individuals handled themselves and how they handled business. It made no sense to me. I could not wrap my mind around it. Next week, when we go to the third episode in Why I Left Politics, I want to talk to you next week about interactions in South Carolina politics that I had that led to me leaving, and I will never be involved ever again. I'm a pastor. I'm a preacher. I have a good reputation in my community, and there were times while involved in this political business where I literally wanted to come to fists and blows with people that I was having to deal with, and very harsh words were had between myself and other people who were involved in the process, and that is no place for a pastor to be. I'm not a wimp, and I'm not somebody that you can run over. I'm going to stick to my guns, and I'm going to be face up with you, and I'm going to deal with you the way you deal with me. And so that sometimes can put a pastor in a position that is not conducive to godliness or Christianity, and I knew that I had to get out. But I saw things and was lied to about things, even in the state of South Carolina, by some of the higher ups that really, really, really soured my taste on politics. I will never be involved again. That's why this episode is called Why I Left Politics. Hey, consider All of these things, weigh it out in your own mind. Don't take me at face value. I'm just giving my story. Hey, look forward to seeing you next week on the Higher Grounds podcast. And until then, you keep pressing on the upward way. See you next week.